It's all dark. I don't feel anything anymore. Have you ever heard a phrase so cold that it seems to carry the silence of an eternity? Words whispered on the threshold between life and death, where darkness is not just the absence of light, but the total lack of hope, of sensation, of soul. Who said that? Who faced such absolute emptiness that the last strength of their body surrendered to nothingness? These words are not just a rant. They are a portal to stories that defy understanding, echoes of confessions that cross time, words spoken at the moment when the end becomes inevitable. Imagine a cell, cold, isolated, suffocating. The heavy, almost palpable air mixes the smell of sweat, fear, and resignation. Breathing is weak, irregular, a whisper in the immensity of silence. Trembling pulses try to grasp the life that escapes, while darkness advances, like an invisible cloak that swallows all light. It is in this space between life and the afterlife that these phrases were pronounced, and that is where we will enter. Stay with me until the end. What you will discover now may surprise you. It's all dark. I don't feel anything anymore. This confession seems simple, but behind it lies a universe of pain, regret, and mystery. It carries the weight of an entire existence, of crimes, betrayals, hidden silences, and unspoken truths. It is the restrained cry of someone who already knows that destiny will be relentless, and that there will be no redemption. But why exactly did he say this phrase? Under what circumstances was it said? What inner demons were revealed in the final seconds of the person who uttered it? The answer to these questions is not comfortable. It challenges what you think you know about justice, guilt, and condemnation. The corridor that leads to this cell is long and dark. Footsteps echo, measured, metallic. The sound mixes with the accelerated beating of a heart trapped in a body that is already giving in. Ahead, a door closes. Not just a steel door, but the definitive closing of a story, a life that is coming to an end. Have you ever been through this? Have you ever felt the cold of total absence, the silent terror of not being able to go back? This is the feeling we will try to understand, because these last words are not just the end, they are the beginning of something much greater, something that few have had the courage to hear. Inside this cell, there is no room for lies. The truth escapes, however bitter it may be. Some confess to crimes that no one ever suspected. Others whisper names that could shake entire systems. There are also those who, in the face of death, feel nothing, an absolute emptiness, a disconnection from the world that has abandoned them. I don't feel anything anymore. This phrase uttered with the last breath may be a request for forgiveness, a curse, or simply the end of torment. But always, without exception, it is an enigma. Meanwhile, darkness grows. Silence takes over. The line between fear and acceptance becomes blurred. Have you ever wondered what goes through someone's mind when they know they are about to disappear forever? What's left? Revenge? Regret? Fear? Or maybe nothing at all? An abyss so deep that words cannot reach it. That last moment carries an intensity that many avoid, but few can forget. Stay with me until the end, because within these final confessions lies the key to understanding the true face of human beings when faced with the inevitable. You will discover phrases that chill the soul, stories that change everything that was thought about the condemned, secrets that remained buried until the last seconds. And when this darkness finally envelops everything, what will be left? Only one thing is certain. These voices that fade away leave traces of mystery and pain that no one can erase. Now, look at this empty cell in your mind. Feel the breath that is lost, the pulse that trembles, the weight of absence. This darkness is not just physical. It is the reflection of what we carry inside, the secrets we keep, the choices that define us until our last breath. What you are about to hear next is not for everyone. It is for those who want to see the abyss, look inside it, and try to understand what is hidden beyond the silence. And what comes after that is a mystery that will only be revealed to those who dare to continue. It is in this invisible limit, between the silence that weighs and the darkness that observes, that the most real connection is born. Not the superficial kind, but the kind that touches where no one else sees. The one who recognizes in the other the same abyss that we carry inside. Maybe you felt this. A void that has no name, a chill that goes through the bones, or a restlessness that doesn't leave you, as if something here was speaking directly to something inside. If this feeling has reached you, share in the comments what touched you the most. Sometimes a thought that seemed like yours alone can be the echo someone needed to hear. This silent exchange is what keeps this space alive. It is she who transforms stories into revelations. Every word you say here builds a bridge. Between minds, between scars, among those who feel and do not ignore. If this journey has made sense to you so far, a like is more than a click. It's a way to keep this type of content breathing, to make more people find these stories that the world tries to bury, and if you are not yet part of this circle, your presence is welcome and necessary. Sign up now, not to follow a channel, but to continue a search. Because what starts as curiosity, it may end up being the key to understanding something that has always been there, just waiting to be seen. Stay here. What comes next defies everything: logic, justice, and even the idea of an end. When the voices fall silent, that's when the truth begins to scream, and she doesn't ask permission to be heard. It's all dark. I don't feel anything anymore. These words pierce the silence like a whisper that chills the soul. But what if I told you that darkness doesn't always come before truth? Sometimes it's only when the last breath approaches that confession emerges, a revelation that comes too late to change fate, to undo pain, or to cleanse the souls of those left behind. What would you do if you had seconds to spill everything you've hidden for years? If each word could save a life or condemn another? The reality is that these final confessions carry a weight that transcends time, a burden of remorse, of secrets smothered by conscience or by fear of what the world might think. Have you ever stopped to think about how many times the truth has been trapped in the empty eyes of someone who already knew the end was near? These moments, filled with silence and ragged breaths, reveal a cruel portrait of the human condition, the struggle between regret and inevitability. I buried her in the backyard, behind the rose bush. Forgive me. The phrase seems simple, almost banal, but it carries with it a truth too heavy to be spoken at any other time. The confession comes as a last desperate attempt at redemption, an attempt to ease the weight that has tortured the mind for years. Years that for some meant loss, for others, the suffering of an injustice that cannot be undone. There is a fine line between the impact of these words and the abyss that opens up for those who hear them. Confession can be the key to understanding the mystery that was never solved, or the trigger that destroys any hope of peace. In many cases, it comes to cast a shadow over lives that have already been marked by the silence of doubt. Who lived in prison for a crime they didn't commit? Who has lost a loved one without knowing what really happened? The pain spreads, invisible, like a poison that contaminates memory and justice. These words, however brief, echo like a scream, stuck in the throat of history, a hidden truth that remains between the lines of decisions made long ago. But why does confession always come so late? What stops someone from telling the truth before it's too late? Maybe it's shame, fear, or the weight of carrying a secret that destroys not only oneself, but also those one loves. Or maybe it's the complexity of the human mind itself, a labyrinth where guilt, ego, and pain intertwine so deeply that the truth gets lost along the way. The transformation that could come with honesty is blocked by a mindset that closes itself off in an attempt to survive, even if it means rotting. In the darkness of a prison, whether physical or emotional, it is at this point that the fragility of human beings is revealed naked and raw, a portrait of those decisions that change everything and, at the same time, remain invisible to the world. Each belated confession is a fragment of a life's journey, an echo of what might have been different if the words had come out sooner. If the truth had been faced without fear, the impact of these revelations is not limited to the moment of the final act. It reverberates in consequences that shape history, that alter the course of destiny for everyone involved. Sometimes confession is just the beginning of an endless cycle of pain and questioning, because what lies behind it is more than a revealed secret. It is an open wound that never completely heals. The question remains, what would have been different if these words had come sooner? If courage had been greater than fear? If regret had been liberating and not an unbearable burden? These doubts, these true wounds, remain in the air, impregnated in the atmosphere that surrounds each story like this. And no matter how much the mind tries to understand, the heart knows that there are mysteries that cannot be undone. They only transform into something even darker. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because every belated confession is also an invitation to look beyond what was said, to understand the backstage of the human soul, to unveil the complexity of the emotions that hide in the shadows of regret. It is a journey through the labyrinths of the mind, where hidden truth coexists with distorted memory, where decisions that seem irreversible carry the weight of an entire life. This journey reveals the rawest side of human nature, showing that often the line between the innocent and the guilty is so thin that justice alone is not enough to heal the wounds. With each word the condemned man utters before the final silence, a rare opportunity for transformation arises, not to erase the past, but to understand the reasons, the torments, the choices that defined that destiny. It is an invitation to reflect on our own mentality when faced with error, forgiveness, and truth. Because in the end, these confessions are more than simple accounts. They are pieces of humanity exposed at the most vulnerable moment, where the mask falls and only the echo of a soul in conflict remains. Comment: I'm on this journey too. Silence can be more deafening than any scream. In the final moment, when words fail, when the voice falls silent, what remains is emptiness, an abyss that swallows everything, an absence so dense that it seems to scream in silence. Some said nothing, not a last word, not a whisper of regret. Nothing. The empty gaze, the half-open mouth, the expression frozen in an instant of soundless horror. This silence is not just the absence of speech. It is a silent scream trapped in the throat of existence, a testimony more powerful than any confession. It is the silence that carries entire stories, secrets that will never be revealed, truths that have been hidden under layers of fear and pain. Think of that moment when everything empties out. Time slows down, breathing disappears, and the external world disappears. There is no more room for words, for explanations, for justifications. All that remains is absolute emotional emptiness, a barren terrain where the soul seems to have been ripped out, leaving a body that only breathes, but does not live. This silence is the mirror of what was not said, of what was trapped in a labyrinth of denied emotions. It is loneliness that becomes palpable, an emptiness that consumes any trace of humanity, transforming the moment of death into a stage where silence is the protagonist. The impact of this silence is devastating. For those who observe, it opens a well of unanswered questions and anguish that cannot be filled. Behind the lost gaze, there is a buried story, perhaps a crushing regret or a fear so deep that it blocked even the last breath of confession. The half-open mouth is an unfulfilled promise, a last chance wasted. The soundless horror is the rawest testimony of what the mind and heart could not bear to face. And this emptiness, this silence that screams from within, echoes far beyond the final moment. It infiltrates the memory of those who are left behind, the pain of those who will never know the full truth. There is something almost monstrous about this void, an invisible force that dominates the most intimate moments of life and death. It transforms silence into a language of its own, a direct communication with the mystery that inhabits every human being. The absence of words becomes a kind of unspoken confession, a secret kept under lock and key by silence itself. It is in this space that the complexity of being is revealed, the internal battle between fear, regret, guilt, and the need for redemption. Silence is, therefore, more than absence. It is the absolute presence of that which cannot be expressed. But this power of silence is not limited to the moment of death. It is a reflection of what we carry in life, the emotions we hide, the truths we deny ourselves, the wounds that refuse to heal. Ultimately, the final silence is a mirror of the journey each person has taken, a reflection of what they did not have the courage to face, of the conflicts that were left unresolved, of the decisions that shaped an irrevocable destiny. Therefore, the absolute emotional emptiness of the hour of death forces us to look within, behind the scenes of the human mind, at the hidden revelations that only silence can bring to light. It is in this context that transformation, true change, begins to make sense. Because silence, although dark and heavy, invites us to reflect on our own mentality in the face of what we left unresolved, the words we never said, the gestures we never made. He challenges us to face the hidden truth we carry, to recognize the impact of our choices, to understand that each person's journey is made up of fragments that often only reveal themselves in the most unexpected moments. And it is at this point that pain mixes with hope. The hope that even in the void, there may be a spark that ignites a new light, a chance for transformation, even if late. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because understanding silence at the time of death also means delving into the labyrinths of consciousness, where each absence of words hides a complex story, a universe of contained emotions that often never reach the surface. This analysis leads us to question the weight of the decisions we make, the value of the words we keep to ourselves, and the impact this has on our own legacy, on what we leave to the world when we are no longer here to tell our version of events. Revealing this hidden side of silence is a journey that challenges us to break with superficiality, to seek meaning between the lines of what was not said, in the shadows of what was hidden. Every moment in which silence is imposed, whether due to the lack of voice or the refusal to speak, opens a window to the deepest backstage of the being. It is an invitation to reflect on how we face pain, regret, guilt, and, above all, the humanity that exists behind each gesture or omission. This journey reveals that silence can be a prison, a jail where emotions become entangled until they become unbearable, or it can be the last cry of those who have not found another way to express themselves. This duality is what makes the final silence so disturbing and fascinating at the same time. When we look at these moments of absolute emotional emptiness, we are confronted with the stark reality that not every truth is shared, not every regret is expressed. Silence thus becomes the untold narrative, the forgotten chapter that carries an enormous weight on the collective consciousness. It is the point at which transformation becomes most necessary, where the search for hidden truth encounters its greatest challenge, uncovering what has been buried in silence so that justice, however belated, can at least attempt to re-establish the balance between light and shadow. This is the complexity that makes silence at the time of death an implacable force and at the same time an enigma that defies our understanding. It is a void charged with meaning, a place where the mind and heart meet to face the ultimate truths, the deepest revelations. And it is in this space that we discover that, even without words, the presence of what was not said can be more impactful than any confession. Because silence, in its most brutal form, is the definitive language of what human beings could not bear to reveal in life. Comment there. That makes sense to me. In the final seconds, when life escapes through the last crack, he said something that froze everyone there. Someone is in the room with me. Simple words, but loaded with a weight that no one could ignore. The room where death is decreed becomes the stage for a mystery that defies logic, a threshold between the visible and the invisible, between the real and what lives in the abyss of the mind. The cameras recorded everything except what he swore to see. No shadow, no movement other than his heavy breathing, no soul other than his own, although his voice betrayed the presence of something else. Delirium, spirit, or perhaps the living guilt that manifests itself in the last moment before the definitive silence. This moment is a fissure in rationality, a point where the physical world and the invisible world seem to touch or collide. The condemned man, faced with the imminence of death, crossed more than the threshold of life. He crossed the very limits of consciousness, where the mind tries to free itself from everything that has imprisoned it. At that moment, the barrier between reality and the unknown becomes too thin to ignore. What did he see in there? A specter? An embodied memory? or simply the personification of open wounds, of the guilt that corrodes from within, like a parasite, that insists on showing itself at the moment of truth? The voices that escape the mouth of a condemned man about to die are never simple. They carry layers, shadows projected on the wall of consciousness. The statement that there is someone else in the room transcends delirium. It reveals the complexity of the human mind when faced with the imminent end. It is not uncommon for the brain, under extreme stress and fear, to release images, sensations, and even visions that escape the control of reason. But what cannot be denied is the impact of these words. They stir the invisible, challenge certainty, and leave an indelible mark on those who watch. It wasn't just a random word. It was a call to reflect on what really happens when life fades away. This vision, real or not, reverberates like a deep echo in the backstage of consciousness. Doubt sets in. Could these ghosts be a manifestation of guilt, of pain, or proof that something beyond human comprehension is there, witnessing the last chapter? The human mind under pressure tends to create these presences, but there are those who believe that at that moment, the veil between the material and spiritual worlds thins enough to allow the passage of something that no longer belongs to this plane. At that moment, time seems to expand. The condemned man not only faces physical death, but finds himself faced with invisible forces, which may be reflections of his own tormented soul. The presence he feels in the room could be the weight of the decisions he has made, the materialization of the consequences that haunt him. It could also be the specter of your own consciousness, trying to communicate, to warn, to beg for some kind of redemption that will never come, or simply the manifestation of absolute loneliness, a ghostly companion that reminds you of everything that was lost. The absence of any visual record of this presence only increases the mystery. It is as if the silence of the cameras were confirmation that this something can only be perceived by those who carry pain, fear, and regret in their raw flesh. This leads us to question the very nature of the reality we know. To what extent is what we call reality just a superficial layer, and beneath it lies a world where our greatest pains and fears take shape, are given voice? This notion brings an uneasiness that runs through the mind and does not easily dissolve. The line between delirium and hidden truth is so tenuous that it can be crossed at any moment, especially in those moments when life is about to end. This scene overturns logic and installs doubt as the protagonist. She reveals that the condemned man's journey does not end with the execution of the body, but that there is an internal battle, a silent struggle between fear and conscience, between the real and the imaginary, between the unforgiving past and the future that closes in an instant. The impact of this vision echoes far beyond the room, touching those who witness it and leaving questions that cannot be easily answered. Because what you don't see but feel is a powerful force that moves your mind and soul. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because understanding what happens in the mind and spirit in the final seconds is essential to unlocking the hidden truth behind these experiences. The mindset of the condemned, the weight of decisions made throughout life, the impact of repressed emotions and unhealed wounds are fundamental parts of this journey. These final moments are a kind of portal, where the barriers between the conscious and the unconscious dissolve, revealing what the surface hides. It is a territory where revelations mix with fear, where the backstage of the mind shows a dark spectacle, a desperate struggle for meaning, redemption, or at least understanding. The complexity of the human mind at this critical moment forces us to look beyond appearances and question what it really means to die. Death here is not just the biological end, but a brutal confrontation with one's own essence, with what has never been fully revealed or faced. It is the culmination of a lifetime of choices, mistakes, traumas, and silences that now gain a voice, even if this voice manifests itself in unexpected forms, as an invisible presence, a vivid delirium, or a ghost that inhabits the room along with the condemned man. The impact of these experiences reverberates not only in the mind of the one who is about to leave, but also in those who remain, leaving an indelible mark of restlessness and mystery. This phenomenon, also challenges us to reflect on the meaning of guilt and regret. How can these deep emotions manifest in ways so real that they go beyond the physical? Could it be that in the final moments human beings become capable of perceiving dimensions that were hidden during life, stifled by the pressures of everyday life? This journey invites us to understand that what seems like madness or delirium may actually be the most sincere expression of a person's inner truth, a truth that can no longer be contained, that needs to manifest itself, even if in a frightening or disconcerting way. As the mind plunges into this abyss, behind the scenes of the last breath, we are confronted with the inevitability of transformation. Every moment, every word or silence, carries with it the weight of the choices that defined an existence. And in this scenario, the hidden truth becomes more palpable, more urgent, more impossible to ignore. It is a journey that does not end with death but extends beyond it, in an incessant search for meaning, for justice, for some form of peace. Comment: I'm on this journey too. Requests for a last meal are expected, almost ritualistic. Rare steak, a plate of fried chicken, a glass of whiskey. These are traditions that try to lessen the weight of an irreversible sentence. But some convicts go beyond the conventional, delivering requests that tear apart normality and delve into a dark territory where the torn mind reveals dark secrets, clues to a soul that says goodbye with more than just hunger. These strange desires are not just whims. They are fragments of an untold story, echoes of the invisible wounds that haunt them until the very end. Requests that seem to carry a coded message, a silent cry, an invitation to look beyond the surface. There were those who asked for a doll, not a child's doll nor an ordinary toy, but a strange doll, made of materials no one understood, perhaps an amulet, perhaps a symbol. That doll was not a simple distraction. It was a presence, a silent companion for the last moments. He needed to feel something beyond the emptiness, something that maintained a connection with what had been, with what could still be. In other cases, the request was for a mirror, a broken mirror, often with sharp edges, almost cutting like the memories the condemned man kept. The mirror reflected not only his face but the inner faces, the fear, the guilt, the anguish that he could not hide even from his own reflection. To look into that mirror was to face his own destruction, the inevitable fate that awaited him. But there was a desperate need to recognize himself, to confront that image one last time before the silence. On one occasion, a convict asked for a dead dog, an animal that seemed to carry the weight of his history, perhaps a loyal friend who had died long before him. That request chilled the blood of the guards and prison staff. It was a macabre symbol, a reminder of the death itself that was already lurking, a mirror of the inevitability of the end. A dead dog for a last meal is more than a bizarre choice. It is a silent manifesto of despair, an encrypted message that only those who lived through that torment could decipher. Such requests are like clues left in the path of pain, fragments of a psyche that begs for something more before the final fall. The mind of a convict is saturated with heavy memories, buried traumas that never cease to haunt him. These strange requests are a window into these hidden pains. They reveal how loneliness, abandonment, and guilt eat away at the inside, until all that remains is a desperate cry for meaning. Behind each requested object, there is a story that refuses to die along with the body. It is a code that only those who lived that journey can understand, a symbol loaded with hidden meaning, an attempt to control the last act in a script written by others. These requests reveal the mindset of someone who, even when facing the end, cannot escape the weight of the past. They are the manifestation of an internal transformation that did not occur in life, but which is now imposed. In the tense silence of the cell, the impact of these choices resonates far beyond the moment of execution. They reverberate in the backstage of the mind, in the gears that move guilt and regret, revealing truths that the system, society, and even the condemned would prefer to forget. What do these objects say about the human being? What do they hide beyond what the eyes can see? These are questions that cut like a dull knife. In some cases, the strange request is a form of manipulation, a last-ditch attempt to control what seems uncontrollable. But for others it is a genuine need, a personal right that connects the condemned with something greater than death. These choices are a complex psychological journey, where the weight of decisions, the impact of actions, and profound loneliness converge in a moment of extreme vulnerability. They cling to these objects as if they were a lifeline, an anchor for a mind that is sinking into the chaos of what is to come. The mystery of these strange requests is that they are never fully explained. The accounts are fragmentary, sometimes contradictory. Witnesses speak of disturbing sensations, of a charged atmosphere that seems to condense around these objects. The air seems to weigh more heavily, the silence becomes dense like a toxic cloud. There are reports of whispers, of gazes that cross the space as if something invisible were there, watching, waiting. These moments become part of the behind-the-scenes story of the executions, stories that circulate like dark legends among those who deal with the end of the line. The hidden truth behind these requests remains a mystery. They are more than mere food choices. They are fragments of the mind in collapse. They are symbols of a transformation that does not happen in life, but on the threshold between now and never again. The impact of these decisions is profound because they expose the complexity of a human journey marked by error, fear, pain, and, ultimately, the desperate search for some meaning that makes the darkness seem a little less suffocating. These pleas show that even in the face of death, the condemned retain a tenuous control over their narrative. They cry out for attention, reveal secrets, and expose wounds that have never been healed. They are an invitation to look deeper, to understand that the end is not just a cut and dried, but a sequence of moments charged with emotion, mystery, and revelation. They force us to face the real impact of the final decision, not only on the body but on the mind struggling to find its way through the wreckage. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because understanding this complexity leads us to reflect on the decisions we make in life and the consequences we carry with us until our last breath. The mentality that is formed in prison, the wounds that do not heal, the traumas that become living symbols. All of this makes up a plot that influences not only the convict, but also those around him. Witnessing this spectacle of pain and mystery, the journey of the condemned is also a journey of the human being facing the abyss, where each choice, each request, reveals something about the hidden truth that we carry within us. This reflection invites us to look beyond the obvious, to consider the backstage of the human mind at its most fragile, most brutal moment. The transformation that occurs in these final seconds is not just physical. It is a metamorphosis of the soul, a collision between past and present, between memory and oblivion. The strange requests, the symbols loaded with meaning, are the map of this transformation. They point to a reality that few want to face, a territory where fear, guilt, and despair intertwine, creating a scenario where the truth is shown in fragmented, incomplete, disturbing pieces. Comment there. That makes sense to me. These stories are not out there, within everyone's reach. They are buried fragments, like echoes of confessions whispered by those who have already crossed the line. Only those who truly seek to understand what lies behind the gaze of someone who has lost everything, even their own soul, can grasp what is about to be revealed. What you will see here is not entertainment. It's exposure. It's raw truth. The one that bothers, that weighs, that transforms. Staying until the end isn't just about following a story. It is diving into a territory where reality surpasses imagination, where every detail has a cost, and the next minute could become an open wound in your perception of justice, guilt, and redemption. If you've made it this far, it's because something in you recognizes that there is more behind those icy walls, more than crimes. There are unspoken pains, broken pacts, and silences that scream. With every second watched, you help keep this content alive, to break with oblivion, to give voice to what many prefer to keep silent. This is not just a video, it's a joint journey, and your involvement here carries real weight. Stay with me. What comes now has the power to turn everything upside down. And when that happens, you will never look at these stories the same way again, not even for yourself. The cell was cold. The fluorescent light flickered, casting jagged shadows on the weathered walls. He stood there, alone, strapped to the chair. The silence was heavy, almost palpable, a prison within a prison. But then, just as the nurse adjusted his mask, something unexpected broke the dense atmosphere. He laughed, not a muffled, restrained laugh. It was loud, raw, cold. A sound that cut through the air and made time falter. It was not a nervous laugh, nor a disguised plea for mercy. It was the laugh of someone carrying a dark secret, a truth so profound that it defies human comprehension. His eyes, fixed on an invisible point, shone with a disturbing intensity. There was something beyond insanity there, something that seemed to inhabit a place few dare to tread. His mouth was open, his teeth exposed in a smile that mixed madness and a certain macabre pleasure, as if in that last moment he was somehow in control. A control that escapes all others. The entire room seemed to freeze. Even the air became dense, as if it weighed tons. The world outside the cell disappeared, and all that remained was that man who, in his final insanity, seemed to mock death itself. The fear on the guards' faces was no comparison to the uneasiness he conveyed. Because there, at that moment, he was not just a convict, he was the bearer of an unspoken message, a living enigma about to dissolve into the void. The needle pierced his skin, the lethal injection began to run through his veins, but he kept laughing, a disconcerting sound impossible to ignore. A laugh that seemed to defy the inevitable, as if he were crossing an invisible barrier between life and death, between lucidity and delirium. The transformation in that instant was more than physical. It was mental, spiritual, a final twist of the mind that refuses final silence. And as his body slowly gave in to the fatal effect, that laughter echoed like a phantom echo, an indelible mark on the memory of those who were there to witness it. The laughter that should never have existed in the end. The mask covered his face, his eyes closed, but the sound continued to pulse in his mind, an unanswered question hanging in the air. What did he know? What hidden truth did you carry that turned that moment into a macabre spectacle? Was that laughter the silent scream of a troubled mind or the sign of something much deeper, a mental journey that extended beyond the end? One thing is certain. It was not a simple laugh. It was an impact, an explosion in the routine of the inevitable, a final act of defiance. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, to understand what drives this type of behavior when death is closer than ever. What happens in the human mind when it finds itself face to face with the absolute end? What is the role of internal transformation, of the final mindset, in the face of the last second? And why do some of these last expressions sound like coded messages, clues to a hidden truth that few dare to unravel? This laughter, like many other unusual behaviors, invites us to look behind the scenes of criminal psychology, to the extreme decisions that not only define a life, but impact everything. We understand about fear, madness, and control. These revelations are not simple. They are layers and layers of meaning, fragmented memories, emotional wounds exposed at the most vulnerable moment. It is an invitation to understand the complexity of the human being in its rawest form, a journey that defies reason and plunges into the darkness of the mind. And in this darkness, even a simple laugh can be the trigger for a universe of questions that will not be silenced. What could have led this man to laugh like that? Was it acceptance or denial? Desperation or a dark certainty? What is recorded there beyond the final moment? Comment there. That makes sense to me. Until the last moment, he maintained the same posture. His denial was firm, almost defiant. There was no hesitation in the voice that echoed through the cell, nor any tremor in the words he repeated like a desperate mantra. I didn't do it. The truth for him was a form of armor, a last line of defense against a world that had already condemned him long before the final verdict. The air seemed to compress at that moment, loaded not only with silence, but with an invisible weight, made up of uncertainties and suspicions that could not be erased by a simple verdict. And then, when the body lay motionless, wrapped in the cold cloak of death, the plot deepened. Evidence emerged, documents buried in papers that only came to light after he could no longer defend himself, revelations that disrupted the official narrative, that dispelled certainties and rekindled doubts. It was as if justice itself had been betrayed by its haste, by its blindness to complexity. The cruel paradox. The man who insisted on his innocence may have been all along the bearer of the most disturbing truth, or perhaps the deepest lie anyone could carry, the one that dissolves only in death, leaving a tortuous trail of questions. Mystery settled in the silence of the cell, where no one else could hear his last words. Who lies when there is nothing left to lose? This question reverberated in the corridors of the penitentiary system, on the cold desks of the investigators, and especially in the minds of those who, like us, try to decipher the behind-the-scenes of this story. Because there is something deeply human and terribly cruel in this last resistance to the truth. Denial is not just a defense, it is a cry that crosses the abyss between the fear of the end and the fear of the unknown. It is the shock of the final transformation, where the judgment of the world still weighs more than the internal judgment. This mentality of denying until the end, even when everything indicates the opposite, is a reflection of the complexity of the human being faced with the impact of the decisions that led him there. The journey of each individual trapped in the web of their own story, marked by choices, mistakes, but also by hidden truths that only emerge after definitive silence. What does this last lie reveal? That stories are not always what they seem. That the truth is often an unstable construction, made of fragments, conflicting versions, and wounds that never completely heal. Doubt becomes a silent character, a shadow that accompanies every step of the investigation, and that feeds the deepest curiosity about what really happened. And there is also the psychological impact of this last phase, the internal struggle between accepting the end and insisting on a version of events that still makes some sense. In this conflict lies a hidden truth that few dare to explore. The complexity of the mind that refuses to surrender, even knowing that the outcome has already been written. The revelations that emerge after death show that what seemed simple, a confession or a denial, can be an enigmatic code, an invitation to revisit the story in a new light. Each piece of information revealed carries with it a greater weight, an additional layer in the construction of this dark puzzle. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, to delve into the anatomy of this last resistance, to understand what leads a person to sustain a lie or a painful truth until their last breath. I want to explore how this decision affects not only the perception of those left behind, but the very essence of what we understand by justice, guilt, and redemption. Because this journey goes beyond the crime. It is a dive into the backstage of the human mind, into the silent transformation that occurs when decisions become irrevocable, when the impact of the past projects itself into a future that will never come. And that is when the revelations begin to accumulate, forcing a reassessment of the facts and a restlessness that does not dissipate. This theme, loaded with mystery and pain, reveals a less explored dimension of crime and punishment, the weight of doubt and ambiguity in the final moment. The truth, contrary to what many imagine, is not static. It molds itself, fragments itself, hides in shadows. And it is precisely this play of light and darkness that captivates us, that challenges our mentality, and forces us to question what really matters when all seems lost. The last lie, therefore, is not just an empty word. It is a half-open door to the unknown, a gap that remains, an enigma that insists on not revealing itself completely. Comment. I'm on this journey too. He didn't speak. I couldn't. Or maybe he didn't want to. But he left something that broke the silence, a trace so visceral that it still sends shivers down our spines. A ticket, written with what I had, with what was left of what we call life. He wrote in blood, the truest, most poignant paint there is, the pulse that escapes when there is no more voice. This note was a raw message, a riddle, a time capsule filled with pain and secrets that only the initiated could understand. To the common eye, it was a messy scribble, an insanity. For those who knew the plot behind the cell, a key that opened doors to hidden truths. The dried blood on the paper told a different story from the official version, a fragmented narrative, full of codes and symbols. It was as if he had left there his last attempt to communicate the impossible, the only way to make himself heard when everything else had failed. What he wrote made no sense to most people. Crooked lines, truncated words, incomprehensible acronyms. But for those who held the secret, the note was an explosion of revelations, a clue that dismantled the puzzle, an invitation to cross the threshold of common understanding and enter the underground of real motivations. This message in blood opened a deep wound in the case. It transformed the perception of crime, guilt, and justice. It revealed the impact of choices made in a hurry, of those decisions that, in the heat of the moment, seem right, but which, in reality, hide layers and layers of a truth that has never been told. The note wasn't just a confession or a last word. It was a resistance, a cry that pierced through pain, fear, loneliness, and abandonment, invisible themes that corrode the human mind and that often are buried under tons of prejudice and injustice. Ultimately, this note became a mirror of the condemned man's own transformation of mind, a mind that sailed between madness and lucidity, between remorse and disdain, between hidden truth and apparent lies. Writing in blood was the way to fix, forever, a piece of that conflicted soul, to leave an indelible testimony that challenged the official versions. It was as if he were saying, "You don't know everything you never knew." The journey of that bloody paper brought to light the behind-the-scenes of a system that often swallows complex stories, reducing them to ready-made formulas, condemnations, without nuances. And this is where the mystery intensifies, because the impact of that note reverberated far beyond the prison walls. It raised questions about the very essence of justice, about what it really means to convict someone when their past, motivations, and decisions that led to the crime are shrouded in shadow. The message, although incomprehensible to many, carried such an intense emotional charge that it changed the mindset of investigators, family members, and even ordinary people who, upon learning about that note, began to rethink everything. The weight of doubt was now more present than ever, and it wasn't just the content of the note that mattered, but the act itself. Writing in one's own blood. A gesture of desperation, of revolt, of guilt, or perhaps a symbolic ritual of someone who was transformed inside, trying to leave a mark of their existence in the world, even if it was a painful and difficult to decipher mark. That note revealed the darkest depths of the human mind in the face of the end, the ambiguity between what is said and what is kept silent, between lies and truth, between apparent reality and hidden truth. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, uncovering what lies behind this radical writing. How the decision to leave this message was an attempt at control, a final act of power in a scenario where everything seems to be slipping away from one's hands. This action reveals the complexity of emotions in the final moment. When internal transformation takes place, the mentality is fragmented and decisions become acts loaded with hidden meaning. Discovering what lies behind this note is to enter the mind that does not surrender, that challenges the system, that questions the very meaning of destiny. This journey through the shadows of the note written in blood forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Not everything is black and white. Not every confession is what it seems. The impact of this revelation is profound because it shakes the structure of the narrative we believe to be true, forcing us to rethink justice, empathy, and our own understanding of what is human. It reveals that the last acts of a convict may contain more disturbing secrets than we imagine, an internal battle that goes beyond crime and punishment, delving into the realm of the soul. Right there, I'm on this journey too. In the last seconds of his remaining life, a sentence escaped him, silent but weighty. A whispered confession that no one expected, a crime that never entered the police radar, a body that was never found. It was as if, in that final moment, he broke through the curtain of death to reveal a secret buried in the shadows, a secret that would change the course of history forever. That sentence was not just a word, it was a crack in the silence, a splinter in the official version, A hidden truth about to emerge from the ashes of the past. Who said that? A man who until then had denied everything. A condemned man who had carried the weight of guilt in silence, but who, on the threshold between life and death, decided to hand over something that no one had the courage to seek. This confession, simple and direct, opened an abyss of doubts and uncertainties. A missing body, a forgotten victim, a crime that was never investigated. The impact was immediate and devastating. Suddenly, everything that seemed closed and archived begins to unfold into an even more complex and dark web. A web of lies, silence, and perhaps manipulation. It was no ordinary act of repentance. It was the final decision of someone who, faced with death, chose to break his silence in order to cast a greater shadow over the system that condemned him. That man's journey, marked by tortuous decisions and mindsets, had now reached a new, darker, and more intricate chapter. Revelations that make us wonder, how many other cases hold secrets buried beneath the veil of justice? How many hidden truths are stifled to maintain an apparent order? The sentence left behind carries the weight of an impact that goes beyond the individual. It resonates throughout the entire structure that judges and punishes. Now, this secret is not just his, it belongs to all of us. Because the existence of this second crime and this missing body changes the narrative. It challenges everything we know, everything we believed to be true. The mystery does not end with death. It multiplies, spreads, infects the understanding of the case. A new investigation needs to begin, revealing the behind-the-scenes that have been hidden until now. It is the power of decisions that unfold beyond life, revealing layers of a hidden truth that no one dared to face. And it is fascinating to think about the transformation that occurs at that moment, the mindset that changes when there is nothing left to lose. That condemned man, perhaps overcome by the imminent impact of the execution, chose to use his last words to cast a new shadow, to show that the story they told was only a fragment. The sentence cuts like a knife, reopens wounds, challenges the comfort of easy conclusions. It is an invitation to explore behind the scenes, to delve into a new journey of discoveries and questions, where the line between victim and executioner becomes even more tenuous. This is the moment when the narrative takes on a new dimension, where the weight of doubt overrides apparent certainty. The sentence that reveals a new crime not only deconstructs the past, but also redesigns the future. It makes it impossible to ignore the shadows that permeate the justice system and the complexity of the lives that intersect in this game of power, silence, and revelations. And the search for the missing body becomes the symbol of a truth that insists on emerging, no matter the cost. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, to understand what this last confession shows us about the fragility of certainties and the impact of decisions made in moments of despair. How the hidden truth can hide behind such short words, and yet carry the weight of a bomb ready to explode. I want to analyze how this sentence changes not only the case itself, but the mentality of those who follow, investigate, and judge, causing a silent but powerful transformation. Because the truth is not always where the eyes want to see it. Often it is in what we fail to look for, right there. I'm on this journey too. The silence in the room weighed like an invisible sentence. He knew he wouldn't get another chance. It was the last breath and the final blow, but not a scream. One sentence. Short, surgical, devastating. The one that brings everything down. What once seemed certain becomes doubt, and this doubt begins to spread like slow poison. The face that carried the label of guilty is now a shadow. The alleged victim maybe was never what he seemed. The story, carefully stacked like a house of cards, collapses with a single word. But this isn't just a twist, it's a mirror, a test for those who are really willing to see what no one else wanted to see, because real transformation happens here. When you understand that the error is not just in the records, in the cells, or in the headlines, it's in the way we were taught to judge. Every second you dedicate to this journey is part of something bigger. You're not just watching, you're unearthing truths that they tried to bury, and that puts you in a place that few have the courage to occupy. The final phrase, still undeciphered, hangs like a threat, or maybe, like the key, to open doors locked by fear, by convenience, by omission. What if she changes everything? If you rewrite not just a case but the very idea of justice? You are here, now, and that makes you part of the reconstruction, not from the told version, but from the hidden version. Every word spoken in that room still echoes, not as an answer, but as a call. For those who understand that the truth rarely screams, she whispers, and only those who don't turn their faces away can hear. If this makes sense to you, then you are already in. And what comes next goes far beyond what anyone expected.